Hey guys, what's up? It's Darkmech here and welcome back to another video. Today we are covering off the Shadowlands Blood Death Knight guide, and I'm going to split this one into two parts. Reason being, there is so much to cover off. Moving from BFA into Shadowlands with DK and all the systems involved, I didn't want to end up with a Peter Jackson meets James Cameron baby version Blood Death Knight guide on YouTube. So today we're going to be covering off runes, runic power, abilities, talents, rotation, the effect the AOE Cap introduced in Shadowlands has had on us, stats, Runeforging, and Enchants. And in part 2, the second video, we'll cover off legendaries, covenants, soulbinds, and conduits. So as always, the information supplied to you in this video is from myself, Mandel, and the Acarus community. So a huge thank you to Mandel and all the members of the DK Discord who do all the work with the theory crafting and then allow people like myself to get fact checked so we can make sure that on this platform we're putting out the correct information. So getting straight into this video, guys, runes. Now, before we go into what buttons you push and why, it's important to understand that DKs function around a rune system. Now, DKs have 6 runes, and these runes have a standard recharge rate of 10 seconds per rune. And that recharge rate can be reduced via the stat haste. Now, the ideal playstyle that you want to shoot for is to never have more than 3 runes fully recharging at the same time, and the reason being is that our runes fuel our abilities like Heart Strike and Marrow Rend, which in turn fuel our Death Strikes and our Bone Shields, and you always want to have the ability to recover on whatever side you need via adding more Bone Shield stacks or generating more Runic Power to fuel Death Strikes. Now, we'll touch on the abilities shortly, but I just want to give you an idea of what abilities actually cost you runes. So Marrow Rend is our most expensive rune ability, and that will cost you 2 runes per Marrow Rend. Heart Strike, Death and Decay, Death's Caress, Blood Drinker, Rune Tap, and Chains of Ice will all cost you 1 rune to activate. So, the other side of rune spenders, we have Runic Power. So every rune spent generates 10 Runic Power. Runic Power is used to fuel our primary active mitigation ability in Death Strike. In addition to the base Runic Power generated by spending runes, we also have other modifiers to assist us in generating more Runic Power. So Heart Strike generates 5 bonus Runic Power and up to a total of 15 Runic Power per cast. Dancing Rune Weapon, when it's active, will generate another 5 bonus Runic Power every time you use Heart Strike, and Anti-Magic Shell generates 0.83 Runic Power for every 1% of your maximum health it absorbs. Okay, so that's the foundation system that you're playing around. Let's have a look at the abilities, and I've broken these up into sections as well. So baseline abilities. So Heart Strike. This is the core Runic Power builder for Blood. It damages 2 targets or up to 5 targets in Death and Decay. It applies a 20% snare and it generates 15 Runic Power at 1 rune cost to activate. Marrow Rend. This is a Runic Power builder as well. It costs 2 runes to activate. It generates 3 stacks of Bone Shield. Now, what is Bone Shield? Bone Shield surrounds you with a barrier of bone. It increases your armor by a certain percent, and it also gives you a flat 10% haste buff when you have at least 1 charge active on you. Blood Boil. This is an AOE damage ability we have that applies Blood Plague to all enemies within a 10-yard radius. This is the primary method you're going to use to put your disease on targets. It's also extremely useful for holding aggro in large packs. So what is Blood Plague that I just spoke about? Blood Plague is our disease debuff. It deals shadow damage and gives you a small bit of drain life from it, but it's nothing to write home about. Death and Decay. This is an AOE ground effect spell. It's got a 10-yard radius on it and it will damage all enemies standing within it. It also buffs your Heart Strike when you are standing in it as well. So it allows your Heart Strike when Death and Decay is down and you're standing in it to hit up to 5 targets instead of 2. Death and Decay generally can cost a rune to drop and it generates 10 Runic Power, but majority of the time, due to a passive we have called Crimson Scourge, the majority of your Death and Decay casts will actually be free via that. It's also worth making mention that Blood Spec has a modifier to Death and Decay. It reduces its cooldown by 50% compared to Frost and Unholy. Death Strike. So this consumes 45 Runic Power and it heals you for 25% of the damage taken in the last 5 seconds, and it also applies a Blood Shield to you via our stat Mastery. Now this heal has a floor value of 7%, a minimum heal value of 7%, or 10% with Voracious Talented. So if you're not taking significant damage, you will heal for a minimum of 7% of your maximum health, which is really important to understand. If you're taking larger damage over that period, which is above 7% of your max health, then you will heal for 25% of that damage incoming over that 5-second window. Death's Caress. This is a ranged aggro generator. It applies Blood Plague to the target, but it should generally be only used to pick up targets at range, or if you're outside of melee range and you want to keep spending runes. Blood Plague will be applied via Blood Boil, majority of the time. Passive abilities that we have, so Crimson Scourge. This has a 25% chance per auto attack on a target with Blood Plague to reset the cooldown of Death and Decay and make the next cast free. Should be noted though that your free cast via Crimson Scourge via Death and Decay will not generate any runic power. Mastery Blood Shield. Your mastery grants a physical absorption shield around you for the portion of your healing done by Death Strike and increases attack power at all times. Veteran of the 3rd or 4th War. This is a spec passive we have that gives us 60% extra stamina. It eliminates the chance to be critically hit by NPCs, increases our threat generation, and reduces the cooldown on our Death Grip. And Ossuary. So this was a talent in BFA that has now been baked into a passive come Shadowlands. While you have at least 5 charges of Bone Shield, the cost of Death Strike is reduced by 5 runic power and your maximum runic power is increased by 10. So a great change to see this move from a talent into baseline where it probably should have always been for DKs. And yeah, no complaints about that one whatsoever. Defensive abilities. So Anti-Magic Shell. Pretty much like it sounds, it absorbs magic damage. This can be used also to immune magic debuffs in encounters. It can also generate runic power like we spoke about before. Anti-Magic Zone creates a damage reduction zone for 10 seconds and reduces all magic damage to those standing within it by 20%. It doesn't function like AMS though in regards to negating debuffs, so just be aware of that. Raise Dead raises a ghoul to fight by your side by a minute. Sacrificial Pact. This allows you to sacrifice your ghoul before it expires for a pseudo health pot and an explosion. So sacrificing your ghoul will deal damage to up to 8 nearby enemies and will heal you for 25% of your maximum health. Lichborn grants you a 10-second immunity to fear, charm effects, and sleep. It also gives you 5% leech. Now, while leech isn't overly valuable to a blood DK, it's still not bad. But with the conduit Hardened Bones, this will turn Lichborn into quite a decent cooldown, as at rank 15 of Hardened Bones, it'll provide us with a 15% damage reduction off the GCD, which is a welcome change. It should be noted though, you can heal yourself with Death Coil whilst you are in Lichborn. The thing is, you won't. The reason being is that healing from Death Coil would need to be buffed by about 132% to make this worthwhile, so it's not worth spending the runic power on Death Coil ever over Death Strike. Rune Tap. Rune Tap is back in the kit, it's baseline, it's off the GCD. It reduces all damage taken by 20% for 4 seconds. Dancing Rune Weapon. So this grants you 40% parry for 8 seconds and mirrors your attacks you use during that time. It's generally used at the start of encounters to build up your resources quickly and then just off cooldown afterwards. So when Dancing Rune Weapon is active, you have modifiers that go along with this. So if you use Blood Boil while Dancing Rune Weapon is active, you will spread double Blood Plagues to the target's hit. If you use Heart Strike while it's active, you'll generate an extra 5 runic power on top of your normal. And if you use Marrow Rend while Dancing Rune Weapon is active, you will get an additional 3 stacks of Bone Shield, meaning if you go in and you use Dancing Rune Weapon and hit Marrow Rend, instead of getting 3 stacks, you'll end up with 6 stacks of Bone Shield, which is why it's generally used on pull to build up those resources quickly. Icebound Fortitude, this is our major oh shit button. It reduces damage taken by 30% for 8 seconds. Vampiric Blood, this is our most versatile cooldown we have. It increases maximum health and healing by 30%. While it can be used reactively, it can also be used proactively as well. It has a short enough cooldown, and you can also reduce the cooldown via Red Thirst, that you will have it active quite a bit through Mythic Plus and Raid encounters, so you will really get to a stage where you're quite comfortable in knowing when you'll have it up and when you can use it. Utility abilities. So Mind Freeze, this is our interrupt, and the awesome thing about being us is that we have a 15-yard ranged interrupt. Chains of Ice, this reduces the affected target's movement speed by 70% for 8 seconds. It's an incredibly powerful slow. We do already have one of the best slows, or if not the best slow in the game though, with a 90% slow via our D&D when talented. Dark Command is your taunt. It has a 300% threat modifier during it as well. Death Grip, this will Death Grip a selected enemy to your location. You can use it to take mobs off casts, off channels. It can also be used as a second taunt and comes with that 300% threat modifier as well. Gorefiend's Grasp, this is an AOE version of Death Grip, grips all enemies within a 15-yard range to your target's location. Now you can use yourself as the target, you can use an enemy target as the target, or you can use one of your party members as a central point. So there's lots of avenues that you can kind of go with Gorefiend's Grasp. Unlike Death Grip though, Gorefiend's Grasp is not a taunt. Raise Ally, this is a combat res, costs 30 Runic Power to activate. Asphyxiate is a 5-second single target stun, and Control Dead is exactly what it sounds like. You take control of an undead mob and use it as a pet, which can come in real handy in dangerous packs in dungeons. Moving into the talents portion, and a little bit of a shake up from BFA to Shadowlands in talents, though not a hell of a lot really changes. So row 15, we have Heartbreaker, Blood Drinker, and Tombstone. So Heartbreaker is pretty much in every scenario going to be your pick. The exception to this will be pure single target encounters where Blood Drinker will become an option. So your raid fights, you will most likely see Blood Drinker coming out. For everything else, Heartbreaker will be your go-to. Row 25, Rapid Decomposition, Hemostasis, and Consumption. Rapid Decomposition still at high haste levels may become something, but I can't see anything being picked over Hemostasis. At the moment, it is just too strong and will remain your default pick. Row 30, Foul Bulwark, Relish in Blood, and Blood Tap. So this is where Ossuary got moved to baseline, and it gives us some choice now. So Relish in Blood is actually very close with Blood Tap. If you want greater control over your resources, you will take Blood Tap. If you want less micromanagement, you will go with Relish in Blood. And the only thing you need to ensure that you do with Relish in Blood is just make sure that you cast your Death and Decay, Crimson Scourge procs as soon as they proc, and that's it. Row 35, Will of the Necropolis, Anti-Magic Barrier, and Mark for Blood. Will of the Necropolis and Anti-Magic Barrier, again, here's some choice. Will of the Necropolis is your default pick. Anti-Magic Barrier for any raid fight that requires high frequency on AMS or larger absorptions is an option though. Row 40, Grip of the Dead, Tightening Grasp, and Wraithwalk. Again, nice choice here, no complaints with this row. Grip of the Dead for Mythic Plus as you get your Giga Slow out of it. Tightening Grasp for raid fights with ads and requiring extra grips. And Wraithwalk if you want more on-demand mobility in your raid. Row 45, Voracious, Death Pack, and Bloodworms. Scrap Death Pack out of there straight away because it's a trap. Voracious is now a serious contender though. This causes your Death Strike to heal for 20% more and in turn raises the minimum Death Strike healing threshold from 7% to 10%. So this is going to be a choice for your higher raid, prog, Mythic Plus content. Bloodworms will be your default for anything outside of that though, as Bloodworms is going to be the only option that still provides damage and healing. But Voracious is now certainly a contender in that survivability category. It will also provide you with larger blood shields from your Death Strike as well. Level 50, pretty much pick your poison. Purgatory, Red Thirst, and Bone Storm. So Purgatory is fantastic for progression or any content that you're afraid you're going to die on. It's a nice coverage for mistakes that you can make as well. Red Thirst gives you far greater control over your vampiric blood uptime, and Bone Storm just gives you more pew-pews in AoE, but will probably eventually scale out in higher content of keys. So moving into the rotation or the priority side of things. So the simple version around priority that I'm going to do via bullet points here to try and make this really simple if you're new to the class. You press Marrow Rend if you've got 0 stacks of Bone Shield or your Bone Shield is about to expire. You press Heartstrike if you've got more than 7 stacks of Bone Shield on you and have 3 runes available. You press Death and Decay when you get a Crimson Scourge proc. You use Death Strike if your health is low, if you've just taken a large hit, or if your next ability you use will cause your Runic Power to cap out, thus wasting resources. Your Blood Boil, if you've got 2 charges sitting there, or if any enemies surrounding you are not affected by your Blood Plague. Generally, you want to keep your Blood Boil charges rolling, don't just be sitting there on 2. Marrow Rend if you have 5 or fewer stacks of Bone Shield. And the reason that you want to make sure that you've always staying above 5 stacks of Bone Shield, between 5 to 7 generally, is that passive we spoke about earlier, Ossuary. So you just want to make sure that you're always monitoring your runes so you can always stay above that 5 Bone Shield mark. So a note about Bone Shield and a term that you might get or you might hear, bad Marrow Rends. So Bone Shield, you want to stick to between 5 to 7 stacks, as I was talking about before. Wasted Marrow Rends are pretty much any Marrow Rends that come at 7+ stacks of Bone Shield. And the reason being is that they could be used on Heart Strikes to fuel more Runic Power, to fuel more Death Strikes. You get that benefit from Ossuary once you're above 5 stacks of Bone Shield. There's no need to try and sit at 10 stacks of Bone Shield all the time or anything like that. You're far better off using those runes into Heart Strikes for more Death Strikes. A note around Rune Tap, because I know there's a lot of excitement about Rune Tap being back in the kit. Getting Rune Tap back might seem great on paper, and don't get me wrong, it's a welcome inclusion into our kit. It's off the GCD. That's solid. However, it isn't a cooldown that doesn't come without a byproduct or a price. So the fact that you're spending 1 rune to activate the cooldown means that you give up that 1 rune in place of a Heart Strike. Heart Strike, of course, generates Runic Power. Runic Power, of course, fuels Death Strikes. So Rune Tap basically causes you to give up 1 form of mitigation for Rune Tap in form of another form of mitigation via Death Strike. Most of the time, Death Strike is far stronger a mitigation than Rune Tap is, so you're basically making a choice between which one you choose for. The other thing with Rune Tap is when you activate it, your incoming damage is far lower over that 5-second window, which means that your next Death Strike is smaller and your next Blood Shield is also smaller as a result. So what you'll find with Rune Tap is it'll be used when you are moving into packs and you have no Runic Power, no Bone Shield stacks, or you're about a second off being meleeed. That's when you'll see Rune Tap being activated and generally used through our cooldown, through our toolkit. Using it in packs will probably be the suboptimal way to play with it. So just be aware of that. It's a form of greedy mitigation, I guess you could say. Don't get me wrong, if there's any ability that will kill you without having it, then it certainly does have value, but they're sort of few and far between that we've been finding out, you know, as the expansions have been progressing. So the opening rotation, what you'll press moving into targets, raid and mythic plus wise. So 1 second before getting meleeed, as I just spoke about, you'll use Rune Tap. So that baseline function of Rune Tap will now be used in our opener 1 second before you're getting meleeed. So get into the habit of using Rune Tap as you are moving into packs or bosses. If it's a raid and you've got Blood Drinker talented, you'll be using Blood Drinker as you close the gap to the boss on your way there. If you're Mythic Plus and you don't have Blood Drinker, just ignore that bit. You're going to use Dancing Rune Weapon before you reach the packs or the boss to ensure that it's off the global cooldown and you're able to use your abilities so you're not locked like that while you start taking damage. If it's a raid and you're using Blood Drinker on the way in, you can activate Dancing Rune Weapon while the channel is going and it won't break it. When you get to the packs, you've used your Dancing Rune Weapon, your GCD's refreshed, you're able to use abilities, you're going to hit Marrow Rend straight away. That's going to give you your 6 stacks of Bone Shield straight away. It's going to get us into that Ossuary passive. You're then going to use Blood Boil to apply your Blood Plague to all the targets within. You're then going to start using Heart Strike to generate your Runic Power, and then you're going to go into that dot point rotation that I was talking about before of your priority system. So the AOE cap that's been brought into Shadowlands and what effect it has on blood decay. Awesome news. We were the OG target cap tank. So we're seeing exactly donuts for change. Heart Strike will still cleave 1 extra and 4 extra while it's in Death and Decay. Blood Boil is still uncapped, and as a result, you can expect to see basically 0 impact in Shadowlands to DKs. Cool beans. So moving into the stats side of things now, guys. So our stat priority has not changed, and in fact, it's been further reinforced by the changes due to diminishing returns on secondaries placed in Shadowlands. So item level, versatility, haste, and then mastery crit. So versatility. Versatility once again is our main go-to stat. It is a triple threat stat. Versatility provides a reduction in damage taken, it increases our self-healing via Death Strike, and it also increases our damage output. Haste provides a 1.1% increase in rune generation per percent of haste thanks to Bone Shield, and it does have an impact on smoothing out your rotation. It also has an impact on your reaction your rune spenders. However, don't make this mistake and this common misconception that stupid amounts of haste leads to this fantastic level of survivability. It certainly has a place in smoothing out the rotation and making DK feel nice to play. However, your survivability is generally based around how well you press your buttons and the timing of your death strikes versus how much haste you have. Mastery. So this is the Mastery Blood Shield, and it provides you a Blood Shield or an Absorption Shield and an attack power increase. It doesn't provide as much value as haste or versatility, but there's no reason to actively go out of your way to avoid Mastery as a stat. It does have some merit, in fact, in very high levels of Mythic Plus, where you're getting hit consistently harder. Critical Strike. So crit is generally geared more towards damage, and it does gain some value in Mythic Plus. Reason being is our critical strike rating is converted into parry, which generally you get more value out of in Mythic Plus because you are having, more mobs hitting you, leading you generally to more things that can be parried in that higher uptime. So whilst from a survivability perspective, it might not be the greatest stat, it still does have some value, and it again is not a horrible stat. So moving into Runeforging, guys, and Shadowlands brings to the table some new runes, which is awesome. So we have 4 new runes joining our 2 OGs. So we have Rune of Hysteria now. So this gives you extra maximum runic power. It also generates more runic power from your runes. So with Hysteria, your Runic Cap moves to 145 runic power, including the ossuary bonus of 10. Rune of Sanguination, this is a 1% damage increase to Death Strike for every 1% of the mob's missing health, along with a 48% heal when you fall below 35% health. That can only occur once every 5 minutes. Rune of Spell Warding, this is a 3% magical damage reduction and a 10% max HP shield that you can get 3 times a minute. Rune of Unending Thirst, this is the most questionable rune in PvE. All effects, haste, and healing are on a 10-second proc on enemy death. So, not going to see it getting used in raids, and I think it'd be very questionable to see it used in Mythic Plus. So, those coupled along with our old faithful of Fallen Crusader and Stone Skin Gargoyle give us some choices now. So, for farm style, lower content, stuff you're not worried about, you just want damage, you're going to go with Rune of the Fallen Crusader, nothing changes. For higher Mythic Plus or progression style encounters, you're going to go with Rune of Hysteria. For high magic damage fights, you'll go with Rune of Spell Warding. And now comes the cool bit, weapon swapping. So since you can now change weapons in your key, you will actually want 2 weapons. You're going to want one with Rune of Hysteria or Fallen Crusader, depending on your content, and one with Rune of Sanguination. And the idea is that you will use your one weapon for the majority of that encounter, and when the boss dips into its execute phase, you will switch weapons to Rune of Sanguination, which is really cool gameplay. I really like that we can do this now. I think this is cool. Moving into the last section, guys, Enchants. So rings, nothing changes as we went through our stat priority. So Tenant of Versatility, you're going to put Versatility on your rings. Chest, we have 2 options at the moment. Eternal Stats, which gives you an increase to all your stats by 30. And the other option is Eternal Skirmish, which gives you 20 strength on your chest and gives your auto attacks an additional chance to deal shadow damage. Gloves, Eternal Strength, we put 15 strength on our gloves, or strength on our gloves I should say, depending on what rank. And Cloak, we have two options. Fortified Speed gives us 20 stamina and 30 speed, or Soul Vitality for EHP purposes, which increases your stamina by 30. So that is it, guys. Any questions at all, hit me up in the comments below. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch the video. I appreciate it. Make sure you come and join the Discord. Come find me on Twitch. And as I said, that part 2 will be out shortly. We're going over Covenants, Conduits, and Soulbinds, and Legendaries. So if you're after that info, hopefully I get everything you need in that video. Like, comment, subscribe. Thanks so much again, guys. I'll see you next time. See you, fam.